agenda for quite a long time, and it's hard to even speak of really and deal with in a short time. And I hope you don't mind, but I'm not going to talk about the main argument of my book, because you can always get that. It's available on Amazon. I mean, that's not an advert. It just saves me. It just saves me the business of. I mean, I couldn't even begin to plough through it. So you might as well, if you want to follow this up, it's available, and I'm not going to address that. But what I'm going to do is talk about a bit about how the church tackles these kinds of problems, and to reassure us in a way that we've been here before. And God's seen us through the previous examples of very vexing problems, and has preserved the gospel in its integrity, has preserved the church, and that we've moved on. I always think it's worth remembering that actually the church is very, very old, and it's tackled a lot of very hard things. The church I was attached to when I first was ordained was ancient in 1005. And in the registers, the parish registers were fascinating to read. There were all sorts of things. There was a period in which the plague broke out in the parish, and they were having so many deaths that when they put the first name in the register in the morning for the first burial, they just put and another, and another, and another on the same day. Imagine what it is like to be in a church where people are dying at that rate. And yet God saw us through it, and we were still there and still preaching the gospel and still believing in him, and in the end God will make these things good. Now that is the context I think we should tackle this problem with. It's a big problem, we've got to think about it, and we've got to work out how to react to it, but it's not the first problem that the Lord has helped us through, and it won't be the last, I'm sure. Okay? Now, in order to help us on it, I'm going to spend a few minutes drawing a comparison between a major problem in the church's history and this gay issue. And so there are some points of contact. And the problem that I've chosen as an example, a historical problem, is the Arian controversy in the first few centuries of the church's life. Arius was one who came up with this idea that in order to preserve the monotheism of God, the unity of God, somehow the Son had to be some kind of creature. He couldn't be God. If you want to maintain the Trinitarian formula, you've got three things to hold together. You've got to hold together that there is one God, that the Son and the Father are differentiable persons, and the Son is divine, the divine sonship of Jesus. Now, if you think about it, it's easy to have a theology if you break one of those off. Anyone will do, and some of the heresies of the ancient church can be explained like that. You break one corner off, the easy solution you get with just the two left, whichever those two might be. Well, Arius came up with the idea that you've got to break off the divine sonship bit of the triangle and just deal with the monotheism and the differentiable persons. Modalism broke off the differentiable persons bit. Okay? Now, you'll be aware of all that from patristic studies and so forth. But it all starts, you see, with an idea. Now, beware of ideas. If you go to a bookshop and you flick through the book and it's full of ideas, don't buy it. Because the church doesn't run on ideas, it runs on insights. And insights are God-given things. And Arianism was not an insight, most certainly not. It was an idea. It was a very plausible idea. And, of course, because he'd broken off one of the corners of the triangle, it was so easy to explain. And a lot of people get carried away like that. You see, what happens is these ideas are often substandard versions of Christianity with a bit missing, but they're so much easier to explain. And so they have the appeal. You know, a lot of people in the Arian controversy couldn't see what the fuss was about. And if you went to a church now somewhere out in the middle of nowhere and said, does it really matter whether the Son of God has an eternal beginning? They'd look at you and say, no, of course not. It doesn't matter at all. I mean, as long as we have our have some coffee after service, it doesn't matter what happens really. And they run on donuts, these places. Not theology, not truth. I mean, let's not get carried away. But the point is this: it's an idea, and this gay thing is an idea. It's a way of looking at things, and it has an appeal. The Arian idea was an idea, and it had a Greek appeal. It appealed to Greek culture. It borrowed into Greek culture. It borrowed into Greek logic. If you were a Greek, you'd be able to follow Arius all the way. Well, in the same way, it's a moral issue rather than a theological one, but the homosexual issue is an idea which buys into Greek culture. And we know that Greek culture was sold out on the whole business of physical pleasures and the control of our lives largely by our appearance, deportment, and what we found pleasurable. That's how Greek culture worked, especially in the 3rd century BC. It was getting a little bit, it was out of favour by the time actually the New Testament was written. Homosexuality was. But it's the same sort of thing. The homosexual idea is something which appeals to a surrounding culture. It buys into a surrounding culture rather than taking its direction from the apostles. The Arian did that. The Arian problem was they didn't listen to the apostles. They listened to the surrounding Greek culture. Okay. How then did how is the Arian problem resolved? Well, of course, it's the Council of Nicaea, actually, isn't it? And it was do you know why the apostolic witnesses, the witnesses to apostolic truth, won in the debate in the the Council of Nicaea? It was because they were all most of them were bearing injuries from a recent persecution. You see, all the Arian protagonists were cool and smart, like the super apostles at Corinth, and they presented themselves very well, slick arguments, probably had tremendous visual aids, all that kind of thing. And the people on the apostolic side sort of limped in and gave their witness. And one of them had lost an eye, had been gouged out to make him deny Christ. And the force of that was immense, and that's why the council ruled against Arius and for the Orthodox position. Now, many people have suffered for orthodoxy, even in our own day, and especially over this issue. Churches are torn apart, people lose their licenses, people lose their livings, they go off into the wilderness. Well, in the end, if that's true for you, or you know people who've suffered that, remember that in the end, the suffering of the church wins an argument for the apostolic witness better than any kind of slick Greek reasoning. I suppose that's, in a way, I just want to start the ball rolling with that thought, to show that we've been there before. Following Christ and suffering with him wins the day. It's not an easy solution to this problem, and that's why it takes 200 years, because the length of time of suffering is part of the suffering, isn't it? It's not a short, sharp experience, it's a long haul for a lot of us. And we've got to wait and pray and be faithful, even in adversity, so that when due time comes, the Orthodox position will be restored, and that this will get over this grave and destructive and serious error. There are lots more to say about this problem, so I'm going to take questions, and we'll see what we can do. No promises of instant success, of course, but I'll do what I can if you have questions. Thank you. Yeah.
How would you wrestle with people who advocate homosexuality as a viable lifestyle, who wrestled with fasting and prayer, both with the scriptures in the original languages and with historical witness, who are evidencing the gifts of the Spirit and the fruit of the Spirit in terms of character and performance that reflects that of Christ? And they, after all of that, the area where they feel like this is a contextual, historical argument is on this issue. They're not advocating abandonment to loose living.
No.
They're advocating a monogamous relationship with a partner in love. And so I think that sometimes when I'm talking to people who oftentimes demonstrate more Christian character and Christian witness in their lives, more faithfulness to wrestling with the issue, I have a more difficult time engaging that.
Yes, right.
So what are your thoughts?
Well, yes. What I think I'd want to say is this, that we derive our moral moral convictions from an argument of reason from apostolic witness. So, for example, the Roman Catholic Church has held and continues to hold that the primary purpose of sex is to procreate, and that the Jewish antecedents to the New Testament and throughout the Old Testament, all the way through, that procreational function of sex controls its use in marriage only. So that all sex, however loving, outside marriage, that is between a man and a woman, for procreational purposes, outside that is illicit. You might be a wonderful musician, you might be a wonderful artist, you might be a wonderful loving person, you might fast every Tuesday night, you could do all sorts of things, but in the end, if you conduct yourself sexually outside the bounds of marriage as a Jew, we're talking about, then you are engaging in illicit sex. You can't, you can keep all the commandments except one, and you might be an exemplary at all those other commandments. But if you don't keep that last one, or you break the law in one respect, then one has to say, however much one appreciates the kindness and goodness of people, one has to say, well, this is out of order. It's chaotic. It's intrinsically chaotic. That's the painful thing. One doesn't want to say anything. Actually, one doesn't want to say anything unkind to anybody, does one? It's a bit like these politicians who don't want to hate anything. At least they're all broccoli. But you've got, in the end, we stand for something higher than that. I do sympathise with your position and your argument, but does that begin to answer it?
I guess maybe a subsequent question is if like our understanding is rooted in the creation mandate to be fruitful and multiply, how then do you take that a step beyond to address people who may be married but can't have children because they can't be fruitful and multiply? Is that then illicit sex? Does that make sense?
Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, well,
like maybe have genetic conditions or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. Well, what we have to do is we have to draw. What I do in my book, as I say, well, how are we to understand porneia, the word porneia? And the only way to understand porneia is to say, well, that covers all the sex which was considered illicit by the Jews. The Jews had, we draw on the Old Testament. The Old Testament had, 1800 odd years to shape how we understood these things, and Jesus has a great respect for that heritage and draws on it. So I want to say, well, okay, in Jewish communities, if you were married, you could have sex whether it produced children or not, but it wasn't porneia. And I think we just live with that. Admittedly, there are other factors. I mean, not every sexual engagement needs to result in a pregnancy for it to be acceptable, because that would be a completely hopeless kind of formulation, Yes. Yeah.
You spoke about the homosexual idea,
Yes.
but I would just like to hear a little bit more about what that means to you, and what you mean when you use that term.
Okay. All right. I think this is important, actually. Let me see if I can sort of trace it. You know that modern research into sexuality has suggested, or at least set forth, a kind of model for understanding men and women on a kind of spectrum. So if you have, let me just see if I can draw this. This was over yesterday's talk, but never mind. So you have, strongly male and strongly female, whatever that might be. And there are several reasons why one might think that there was a variation in masculinity or femininity. This is a common model, okay? It's what you do with it that's important. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with the fact that, first of all, here, there's a small proportion of the population, about 0.7%, who have the misfortune of having a physiological gender confusion, okay, and it's an affliction. It's like having been born with some other abnormality. It's a tragedy, and we need to be compassionate about that kind of thing, And then, of course, there are others who might have various chromosomal abnormalities. That's a similar kind of thing. There's an overlap between those two. And then there's another group of people who may have a metabolic abnormality, that it's affected by hormone levels, that kind of thing. And there is, I think, a serious suggestion, certainly in Britain, that some of this problem, if it's a problem, we'd say it's a problem, arises because of various hormones are put into the food chain. So that there are some possibilities there too. All these are various forms of affliction. Some of them are avoidable, but all of them are afflictions. There are others, though, who have psychological afflictions. This idea that somehow people feel like they're a member of the opposite sex, or that they are psychologically damaged by very poor upbringing, so that they boys who have not got good relationships with their fathers, sound relationship with their fathers, can end up growing up looking for that absent relationship with the male, which they lack from their early childhood, so that they can form homosexual relationships with other men. Okay, all these things are various forms of this affliction, and I think one of the saddest ones is this fashion gay thing. We have this in Britain a lot, that it's become very fashionable to out as a homosexual. And therefore, young people who might have some sort of confusion in their teens are told that they must follow those particular instincts and end up joining what is called now the gay community. All those things are difficulties, and they've multiplied over recent years. But the key thing is how we respond to that. Now, of course, I know some people want to say, well, none of them are maladies. Everybody's, this is how I was born. This is a part of me. This is actually what I'm like. But actually, Christians have got good grounds to reject that diagnosis. It's like me, for example, saying, well, you people are lovely, selfless, generous people, and it will be very, very wrong for you to take your neighbour's lunch, because you are by nature selfless. But I am a selfish person. It's part of how I am, and I've been born like that. I've always been selfish as far as I remember, and I'm inclined to take my neighbour's lunch. And it's right for me to express myself in that particular way. I know that's a stupid example, isn't it? But that's the sort of argument that is being used, and we Christians have graciously must reject that kind of argument. If you take this sort of situation here, which merits our concern and our sympathy, because it describes a whole series of what we have to own up are as maladies. If you take it in the direction of the world, what happens is everything on there is validated. And you end up then having to say, well, we have to now accommodate every possible kind of relationship that this particular map would suggest is viable. And what happens then is we then erode and destroy the whole building block of Christian society, which is the family. You don't have proper families anymore, and also you don't raise children in proper family relationships. And so actually you're likely to propagate this problem to an even greater degree in the next generation. If you take it into the church, and what you don't do is point an ugly and accusing finger at all the people who happen to have had these various levels of affliction of various kinds. You don't do that. What you say is, okay, the church is an ark. The church is the place where we're safe. We can find ourselves in relationship to God. We can live a holy life. We can be fulfilled as the people of God. So, and every church, I've ever served in has had people of a homosexual inclination who have found their place in the church, family relationships in it, because they've been celibate. They're like all other single people. They can't indulge in sex because sex is for married people, as per the Pornair argument. And so they've found an intimacy and a safe family relationship within the church, and that has been a blessing to them. And I've known many people. I had people in my church who were that way inclined, but who served as servers and did various things and performed functions in the church. And they themselves were glad to have a place where they could find fulfillment as celibate people. Now, that's a very different calculation, of course, to the world. The world thinks you have a right to sex. I don't think we do have a right to sex, any of us really. It's a gift given to married people for the purposes of raising children and for uniting men and women in secure and happy marriages. It's a great gift. It's a great gift, but we don't all have it. So that the way we process this is quite different. And we must be careful not simply to condemn it and keep people out, but to realise and to do the hard thing, and that's to maintain a proper Christian community, which is grounded in the truth of the gospel, informed morally by the teaching of the New Testament, and therefore a place of safety for everyone. When you go to a church, you need to be safe from your own sins and your own sinful inclinations. You need to be safe from everybody else's as well. It doesn't go any distance to answering your.
Sort of. I think what I'm struggling with a little bit is the way that you're describing it. It seems as if you're saying it's your own opinion and perhaps the opinion of the Orthodox Christian Church that a homosexual or bisexual orientation would be morally lesser by its very nature without behavior. And one of the questions that I've asked a lot is, when it comes to sexuality, are our sexual urges or our sexual inclinations a moral thing at all? Or does it only become a moral issue when it moves into, for instance, lust or behavior that would be outside the will of God? And so I think that's a little bit of my struggle with what you're saying, is it seems as if you're describing these as afflictions, whereas I have many friends who would not describe their sexuality as afflictions, but they might say, it's just I have non-heteronormative attraction to other people. And so I guess I struggle with that a little bit and would like to hear more what you have to say in response to that.
Yes. Well, I mean, you're not a homosexual until you've committed a homosexual act. I mean, you're not challenged. I mean, to have an inclination to do anything is not to commit a sinful act. It's not sinful.
I'm not a heterosexual unless I have a heterosexual act. I count myself a heterosexual whether or not I have any sort of sexual contact.
Oh no! I was defining the term.
Okay.
That the problem arises from the deed, not from the orientation.
Okay.
But I would stick with the idea that the orientation, if it's towards people of one's own sex, is an affliction. Because I do not believe that it is what God intended for us. We're told, are we not, in Romans, that it's because of our unbelief that we exchanged we get a discredited mentality if we don't give God the credit. And if we do that, we end up getting messed up. If you don't give God the credit, you get messed up. And that's a very crude thing to say, a good way to say it, but that's what Paul is really saying, and I think it is an affliction. I mean, I think that you are damaged if you're of gender A and are not attracted to gender B, if I put it that neutral way, then you are damaged. It's a sad thing. It's a terribly cruel thing to say something's normal if it's not. Supposing you said, well, actually, to all people in wheelchairs, that actually it's you don't need your legs at all. It's quite normal not to have the use of your legs. Well, that's not true, and they wrestle with the business of coming to terms with the fact they don't have the use of their legs. But they're not going to try and say that it's a neutral matter. I mean, you wouldn't have a hospital trying to avoid people losing